Hello, my name is Ross Ackerman. Welcome to this CBC session. I'm here today representing GP Analytics Craft Portal, and today we're talking about what is arguably the largest issue in our space today, which is wholesaler ordering, forecasting, and then the associated out-of-stocks and overstocks that come with that issue. I want this session to be educational, and we're going to try to drive it that way. Obviously, we're going to dovetail back into how Craft Portal is the ideal solution to solve this particular problem. But I spent my entire life, or at least my career life, focused around this particular issue. And then the exciting element of this too is that now that we've partnered with VIP SRS data for the first time, not only can we qualitatively talk about the problem, but we can also quantify the gap as it pertains to our full industry, which is a really exciting thing that we can do today. Now, just a quick little background on myself and the company. Myself, I was originally from the wine and spirit side of the distribution business. I then moved over to a 7 million case beverage or beer wholesalership. It was there that I kind of realized that we had an issue as an industry. I realized that our lack of tools and process associated with ordering was leading to disruptions in our network and issues for our suppliers. Now, our company as a whole, since our founding, has grown actually really quickly because there's a lot of people that have identified or seen this need relatively quickly. So as it stands today, over 3 million barrels of annualized production are moving through the Craft Portal every single year. We have over 2,000 distributor partnerships that are using the portal, or at least going to the portal to order multiple suppliers. That doesn't include the hundreds of export buyer points that are also coming through the portal. All right, so let's talk about the problem again. Ultimately, what this problem comes down to is forecasting and ordering issues driving the out-of-stocks and the overstocks. So, right, the out-of-stocks and the overstocks are the net result that we really don't want. We want to drive down and resolve. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into this. We're going to talk about why does this matter? We're going to talk about what the magnitude of it is. We're going to talk about, more importantly, what it means to your specific business. And ultimately, we're going to talk about how we can close this gap and recover these incremental sales and protect the freshness and quality of our product. So this problem isn't unique to our industry. That being said, the unfortunate reality is that we have become the case study on how bad it can be when we're talking about supply chain and how asymmetry of information, bad data roll up to poor supplier signals and production, right? So this is a Harvard business case review. It's taught in schools across the country today, again, centered around our industry as an example of how bad it is and how it can ripple through to make it impossible to make good production decisions. Now, we can also play this game at beergame.org, which is an app or an application that supports this particular case study and allows you to play it out in real time. Now, some of you in this room may have already played that particular game. The rest of us play it for real in the real world, so it may be a little too close to home. So this isn't a purely academic exercise. This has real world implications for our industry, and it even has a name. It's called the bullwhip effect. So let's quickly walk through the bullwhip effect, what it is and why it's happening. So at the very beginning, we start with consumer demand, and the consumers are purchasing across a 7-day window. Now, as distributor goes to replenish that retail demand, they're looking at it as 5 days of delivery. And they're also not seeing why the retailer is doing what they're doing, right? The retailer could be short on cash this week, so they're under ordering, or they could be heavy into a holiday or conservative into a holiday. It could be that the distributor's buyer was in there and only replenishing part of the store this week. Next week, they do the other part. So all this variability shows up now to the inventory coordinator at the distributor. So there's all this variability happening at the retail level. And all they get to see is the order from the retailer to the distributor. They don't understand the whys, and they're reacting to it, right? So this then translates to their order to you. And their order to you is spotty at best, right? So maybe it's once a month. Maybe it's whenever they run out of something. And that variability of when the order happens compounds the issue. But worse than that, underneath that, in an infrequent or spotty ordering cycle, potentially, is why they're doing what they're doing, right? So it could be that their boss came down the hall and said, we're running heavy on inventory. I need you to bring everything down to 25 days on the floor. That shows up to you as a massive cut in demand. And you may react to that. when in reality, the underlying demand, the consumer demand, the retailer demand, STRs, hasn't fundamentally changed. What's changed is the par value or whatever inventory the distributor's keeping on the floor. And keep in mind, remember that was happening at the retail level too. Maybe they drew down their back inventory because they didn't have enough cash on hand. So now we have two levels of this noise propagating up to you. So the other side of it is maybe your boss came over and said, we ran out of this really key package and don't do that again. So the inventory coordinator freaks out and takes their inventory up to 40, 45 days. That's just as big of a problem. So that shows up to you as explosive increase in demand. Well, the STRs didn't change, just the distributor's ordering pattern. So bad enough that you guys are trying to package into that, right? So you're making packaging decisions around these orders that are all over the place. What's worse is that you have to plan brewing 3 to 4 weeks ahead of that, sometimes even more, right? Especially now that our supply chains are constrained as far as getting our raw materials that we need to produce. You can see how this quickly rolls up into the situations where we are code red panicking the week of, and we are seemingly firing up brewing to full, panicking back down, ramping back up again, versus having this nice, even, efficient flow. So you should probably all identify with what I'm talking about right now. Now, I also like to bring this back to some real world examples that I think will resonate too. And they're kind of unique in our industry and probably help perpetuate the problem. So the first one I want to talk about is a physical inventory. It's a small little instance and has a big effect, right? So let's say the wholesaler is doing their financial, and that could be a fiscal or it could be actual calendar year. Either way, they're going to be counting all their inventory and they're going to be reporting their financials. Inevitably, what a wholesaler will do is they'll draw down their inventory into this count to make the count more efficient and also show a better debt to equity ratio on their books or better cash position. What this means to you is all of a sudden demand falls apart. And if this is a key wholesaler for you, it can look like the world's falling apart. Fast forward 2 weeks later, all of a sudden they panic buy several truckloads and you've already pulled back and now you have to panic the other direction. This is a massive distortion for you that has no relevancy to actual STR demand. This has everything to do with wholesalers making decisions that have nothing to do with supply. Now, it's perfectly rational what they're doing, but again, it's about having the right data. And we'll get back into that, seeing over the horizon, over what's happening as far as noise. The next one is, this is chronic, which is every single summer, coming into the summer, wholesalers are using some kind of rolling forecast. We're going to get into the forecasting challenges on the distributor side, but we'll park that for a second. Either way, what's happening is inevitably they're panicking every single summer. So as we approach summer, inventory, they're not keeping up with their forecast of what's coming in terms of the seasonal spike. And inevitably they panic order a ton of product to try to catch up. So not only are we moving into higher demand overall, but now we're trying to rebuild the DOI, or the days of inventory in the cooler, to catch back up. This is massive distortion for you as a supplier. And what's worse is you don't have the capacity to necessarily meet the underlying STRs in the summer to begin with. So you should have been producing into it. So now we're in a situation where we're not only trying to meet an elevated demand, but we're also trying to rebuild inventory, both of which we can't do necessarily. So there's a variety of ways we try to solve that in our space, but none of them are particularly good. Seasonals, this is a great one, right? So this is the old adage of, tell me what you're going to sell for your seasonal. They get conservative because they've been burned before by other suppliers and they underorder. Your seasonals are an amazing hit. They then panic and they say, oh my gosh, I need a full truckload immediately. So you guys scramble to get the materials, reprioritize brewing, cut your core brand, potentially risking out of stocks in your core brand to refire up the seasonal. By the time you get it to the distributor, like, no, sorry, actually demand's falling off and we're ready for the next seasonal. So this particular example, this happened to me when I was on the distributor side and I saw it happen to the supplier and was the catalyst really for the creation of Craft Portal to begin with. So another example is one that's actually very recent. I saw this happen quite a lot this year, where people were not quite sure what was going to happen with the holiday, specifically 4th of July. They didn't know whether this was going to be a big year or like last year. And a lot of distributors either ordered heavy into the front end of the holiday or ordered light. And it was really a crapshoot. But the net result is, on your side, it looked like, oh my gosh, demand's falling off into the most important holiday of summer. And then on the back end, panic buying to replenish the stores. And this was happening at the retail level too. So again, we're doing that bullwhip effect where the retailers weren't really sure what was going to happen either. Either way, this yanked you around on what was probably the most important week of your entire summer, when you could least afford to have that kind of variability in play. Okay, so we were just talking about the macro level and the bullwhip effect and its implications for the downstream impact. But I want to bring this down from 10,000 feet now to 5,000 feet. And there's more to this than simply the signaling of demand and the distortions of ordering. There's a myriad of issues associated with forecasting and order methodology that we're going to get into at the distributor level. But with our partnership with SRS, like I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we can now for the first time really quantitatively understand what these gaps are and how they play out in the real world. So as we run the data from SRS through the GP Analytics forecasting, what we get is somewhere between 18 and 22% out of stock. And that's huge. That's 1 in 5. And we see this consistently not across just large or small. It's across the entire range of supplier size, from large to small. Now, on the other side of that is, once suppliers implement Craft Portal and we get this free-flowing communication between the distributor and the supplier and all the tools for both sides to facilitate closing this gap and alleviating a lot of the bullwhip effects and the other effects that we're going to get into in a minute, we're able to get this down from 18 to 22% down to 4%. So that is a massive closing of a gap that has serious financial implications. We're going to talk a little bit more about overstocks here in a minute, but I also want to make sure we talk about that here too. What we see at the industry level by running that same algorithm is around 21.5% of product is overage, or overstock, let's put it that way, at the distributor level. So what I mean by that is with more than 50 days on it by the time it goes to retail. Now, it could be significantly older by the time it gets to the consumer or by the time they consume it, but suffice to say, 1 in 5 of your products right now is going out and will be drank with more than 50 days on it. Customers on the Craft Portal side are able to drive that down significantly down to 14.5%. Now, it's not zero, but it is a significant reduction. There's certain inefficiencies we can't get around, especially when we're talking about wholesalers that are further away and order less frequently. But we are able to close that gap significantly by leveraging the Craft Portal. Moving down from the industry down to a specific case example, what we're looking at here is a real supplier that came on with Craft Portal and what it represented. So we can look at a bar chart and see 18 to 22% moving down to 4. But what does that really mean? For this particular supplier, obviously they were starting higher, just over 25% out of stock rate. And they actually got it lower than our benchmark. So moving quickly over the first few weeks, working with their distributor and the tool, they were able to drive it down below 5. Over time, they were even able to get it down to 2.5%, 3%, kind of on a go-forward basis. Again, this particular supplier was able to work with their distributor, leverage the tool to its maximum effect. And this particular supplier was also around 10,000 barrels. So financially, what this represented for them was incremental $1 million in revenue. So as you're sitting there looking at this chart, start thinking about your business, how big it is, and potentially what this gap represents. As we get to the end of the presentation, we're going to circle back to how we can help you understand the gap and what it represents for your particular business. Let's bring it back to the bar graph and talk about overstocks. Again, it's very difficult to financially quantify the impact of the overstocks and what that represents. But what we do know is that 1 in 5 of your products is going to retail with over 50 days on it. And most likely older than that when it goes to the consumer when it's consumed. Now, what's interesting is that this clashes with the overall trend of our industry. As hazy IPAs become more important, and even fresh hop beers become more important, the need for freshness has never been more important. So as we've created styles that are much more sensitive to freshness, our industry's gotten worse at maintaining the appropriate DOI levels, specifically around overstocks. So I can't put a financial number on it, like I said, but the question I would ask is, what is the cost of a consumer having a subpar experience with a product and never coming back to the brand? Now, you've invested an amazing amount of time and effort into making sure you make these quality products and these quality brands that have a specific flavor that you want the consumer to have or experience that they have. And obviously, we want to try to make sure that we align the supply chain and the freshness of the product to meet that overall goal. So we come to what is my favorite slide in the entire presentation. And if somebody were to say, take your entire presentation, boil it down to one thing, what would it be? And this, I think, explains the root cause better than anything else that I'm going to go into regarding why we have an issue relative to supply chain and our distributors. And at the end of the day, it is 100% of your business and less than 1% of theirs. So let's take a look at that one more time. Your business is 100% of what you do. For them, it is less than 1%. And that is what creates most of the issues that we're talking about here today. So the question you need to be asking yourself is, how do you manage your data so you can have the right forecasting, the right DOI, and ultimately better ordering processes and outcomes for your distributor partners? Moving from the fact that it's 100% of your business and 1% of theirs, let's move down a layer and start to look at some structural elements of why this is happening. And at this point, let's put on our distributor hat and realize that this is not a one-sided issue. And I think looking at it through the lens of the distributor is going to help us to really understand why most of this is happening. First and foremost, our distributor partners have had massive SKU proliferation over the last 10, 15 years. So the number of suppliers they're carrying, the number of SKUs they're carrying is vastly different than it was before. Furthermore, historically speaking, their very large suppliers have brought them these tools around forecasting and ordering. As a collective group, us craft suppliers, we haven't been able to collectively bring a tool to the distributor partners like these larger players have. And again, that's where Craft Portal comes in. So what's happened at the distributor level is they've been forced to play a role that they've never played before. And we shouldn't be surprised that they haven't invested appropriately in the tools, personnel, or the techniques, right? So are we gapping on the forecasting technique? 100%, right? So are we using exponential smoothing, trend adjustment, seasonal profiling? Absolutely not at the distributor level, at least for the most part, not. And I gave a presentation very similar to this at MBWA, encouraging the distributors to take on more advanced forecasting techniques, right? So what we're left with is the vast majority using a rolling 4, rolling 8, which leads to a lot of the distortions that I talked about. So the next issue is less than full loads, right? So we are ordering less than full truckloads every week for a lot of our distributor partners. And this leads to inefficiencies in ordering as well, right? So if we misorder, we're potentially faced with the option of, do I ship a smaller than load full truck and deal with the economic consequences of that, or do I deal with the economic consequences of being out of stock? Now, it's simple to say, well, we should have just ordered the right product to begin with in the right quantity so we didn't get in that situation. But again, it goes back to, are we properly using the correct forecasting techniques, and are we thinking about it the right way? Now, a good story that I like to tell is I had a distributor that will remain nameless that they had a sales rep that was a great guy. Everybody loved him, but he wasn't particularly good at sales. We're not going to let him go because he's such a great guy. He's been around for so many years. So the best place for him to go is obviously distributor ordering. But that's completely a square peg into a round hole when this person wasn't trained in forecasting technique, ordering principles, and those sort of things. So what it leads to is bad outcomes. And there's also an incentive gap here, going back to the 100%, 1%. If they run out of your product, they have other products that can slot on the shelf. So they're not out of stock as a distributor, but you as a supplier are. Hey, I've got another IPA I can slot in there. I got another hazy I can slot in there. I'll just double face the one next to it. That serves the distributor, but it doesn't serve you. So there's a mismatch in incentive here. The other incentive to mismatch here too is they may be looking at it holistically and say, okay, for supplier XYZ, I am at 40 days composite. Well, they could be at 60 days on 5 items and out of stock on the other 5, right? And that doesn't serve you as a supplier either. Again, it leads back to the place where we need to provide the tools such that when we are ordering, we're ordering the right quantity such that we're not getting in that position. Because we fully understand and appreciate that the wholesaler is looking at it and saying, well, let's get rid of these products first that you guys are long on before we reorder. That makes sense, but at the same time, it doesn't serve you as a supplier. So all this leads to less than ideal outcomes. But at the end of the day, we at Craft Portal are obviously trying to solve that problem from the supplier side. So now that we have gone through the root cause of the issue, looked at it from an industry perspective, even dove down to an example supplier and its financial impact, now I get to go and give you the hard sell, right? Because now we're going to talk about what we're going to do about all this. And at Craft Portal, we're really not trying to be everything to everybody, and we're not trying to change the world, so to speak. What we're really trying to do is we're trying to solve this problem and help our supplier partners capture the value while also bringing a tool to the distributors that they appreciate and helps them become better channel partners with the supplier layer. So our industry on both sides is full of amazing people. And then we do have overlap from sales perspective, but I wish there was more overlap operationally so that, we could live in each other's shoes a little bit more. Because I think that would go a long way to the understanding of each other's worlds would, I think, go a long way to helping us bridge these gaps. But again, we've developed a tool that accomplishes this to a large degree. So it allows us to speak the same language around orders and forecasting and planning. Again, for me, this has been a personal passion. Never in my life had I seen something so desperately needing to be addressed, and it wasn't. And I'm very pleased today that with our team and our partnership with VIP that we are closing this gap more and more every single day. So here's what we call the Craft Portal data loop. And at the center and the heart of it is Craft Portal. And Craft Portal as a tool and a communication layer. And what we're trying to do is just move around this loop over and over again, right? As we move product from production to packaging to our distributors. And really, as we move around the loop, let's start with the sales team. So we're using best-in-class forecasting. We're providing market knowledge and feedback on forecast between our sales team and the distributor. This allows our sales team to engage the distributor not only just on ordering, but appropriate levels of ordering. And at the end of the day, the sales team can't sell at the distributor level what the distributor doesn't have. So this is the tool that your sales team's always wanted and always needed to have the visibility and the tool with which to work with the distributor to make sure that we're doing the right thing. Again, it's that 1%, 100%, right? And your sales team, this is 100% of what they have to sell that distributor. So as we move around the circle, now we're talking about getting that 18 to 22% out of stock rate down. Our sales team's helping with that. As part of that process, cleaning up the forecast. And this leads to better production decisions. So the production team is using the same best-in-class forecasting, run through the prism of sales with better orders. So now we're packaging the right thing. We're brewing the right things. And that continues to perpetuate the virtuous cycle as we draw down the DOI where we're overstock, increasing where we're understock as we were before with the sales team. Now this leads to the logistics team, right? So now the logistics team is using that same forecasting, better DOI planning, streamlining communication. So if we're making cuts because somebody looks heavy, there's an automated email that goes to the distributor, right? So we're cutting down on all that communication. So we can take all those emails that are floating around and bring it into one place where we can all see it and we're all communicating with what the right language is, which is forecasting and ultimately days of inventory. Now, with Craft Portal, we've taken care of all the heavy lifting. So we're already connected to 2,000 plus distributors. They're already using it. They're ready to go. They're trained, they have logins, and they have a place to start ordering tomorrow. It's all about economies of scale here. And as a supplier, yes, you get to take advantage of all the benefits of best-in-class forecasting, being able to manage your supply chain and the DOI across it in a meaningful way. But let's think about this from the distributor's perspective. And again, this is where economies of scale comes into place and share of mind. Now, we talk about share of mind all the time from a sales perspective, but we rarely talk about it from an operational perspective. And it's a huge part of bringing and closing this issue gap is being able to share a common portal with other craft suppliers. So you may have a distributor that's far away and does very little business, but for another one of our craft suppliers, that could be their most important distributor. So the distributor's in every single day placing orders for multiple suppliers, which brings us back to making sure that they're giving it the appropriate attention, placing the orders at the right time. And furthermore, we bring in the SRS data seamlessly. So it's their inventory, it's their sales as run through our sales forecasting, which again, we've touched on, but is superior to, most likely superior to the way they're forecasting. Now, they can, of course, bring in their own forecasting and look at it the way they want to look at it. But at the end of the day, we're providing all the tools and the data, their own data. to help make these decisions. Now, finally, they also have the ability now to communicate with you. So they can put in notes and say, yes, it says I'm going to 45 days, but I've got an authorization you didn't know about. Well, that's great. And when they hit the approve button, they get a PDF copy of the order, and your team gets notified that that order has been made. And that includes your sales team or whoever on your sales team is assigned to that distributor. Going forward, as we make cuts or adjustments or move things, those adjustments, cuts, and moves are transmitted out to the distributor as notes and email notifications. So it's all seamless and cuts down on all that time we were spending on just trying to manage the communication flow. So we get to spend our time dealing with tactical, strategic issues instead of spending all of our time worried about communication flow and then dropping balls when communication's missed. So here we are on the actual order screen, and this is what your distributor partners will see when they log in. The nice thing is this is the exact same thing you're going to see if you move away from the dashboard down to the order level. Like I mentioned before, all the data is here. So we're talking about items, your pallet quantity, your layer quantity, your weight. It's all going to be here. And we're automatically going to drop them into the correct week of order. So if your order window is 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out, 4 weeks out, it doesn't matter because the system is smart enough to route them to where they need to go, regardless of where they're coming from within the system. So again, what we're seeing here is the inventory from SRS. We're seeing our forecast, which is a roll-up of all their STRs run through our forecast algorithm. It's by week, by SKU, by wholesaler. So it's specific to that week, that wholesaler, that SKU. And this allows us to then take that, project out a DOI, add whatever quantity is on the order to get to then a net DOI position. Now that net DOI position then cascades to the following week and the week after. This is how we're very accurately able to help guide the order in the week of order, right? Because we know what the inventory is today, we know what we're sending, and we know what we're selling based on the forecast. So that allows us to have a very good idea of what really we should be ordering in the week of order. And the nice thing is too, is it's dynamic. So as they're adjusting it, it's going to move those DOI numbers up and down so that we can kind of guide them to the correct DOI, right? They're going to see it if they put in 5 pallets and it's 150 days. They're going to see it right there on the fly. So hopefully we don't get in that position where we're ordering too much, or on the vice versa side, if we're ordering once a month, they order 20 days, that's not enough, right? We need to be at 35 days, 40 days if we're shipping once a month. So it has some guardrails on it to help us stay in the lane of where we need to be. And we'll get into the tools, how we can manage it after the fact. The final piece here is there's the approval button, and that basically does what I said before, which is creates the confirmation email and the notification side on the supplier side, your side. The other nice thing about it is the system's smart enough to understand what it is the wholesaler needs to see, right? So as I'm looking at this, you see a list of items. These are all items that they either A, have inventory on, B, have forecasted sales on, so have sold before, or C, have inbound product on. This allows us to keep the visualization relevant to the buyer the second they come in. Now, they can always add additional products that exist in the portfolio, and I will get into the brand rights element of that because we can also specify what they're allowed to buy and what they're not based on their state, their location, or their individual wholesalership. But this is really important because when we're working with our distributor partners, we want to make it as easy as possible. So we don't want to spend a whole bunch of time them trying to hunt down the items every single time. This makes it real easy. It's there, and it's in the descending order of highest velocity to the lowest. So what you're looking at now is the heart and soul of the craft portal as it pertains to the supplier. We had a client that came to the portal, but before what they were doing is they would print out all their orders, put it out on a big conference room table, and basically decide what's shipping when, what to cut from what orders, and then reprint it all out, do it again until they optimize their shipping and supply chain for the week. Now, we've taken that conference room table concept, and this is what we're looking at. We call it the dashboard. And what you see here is everything you need to do to be able to be just as successful with that without spending hundreds of hours and tons of trees. So on the left side, we see all of our distributors, what their associated orders are, how many units, pallets, we look at it by weight. And on the right side, we see all of our products. And we color code these products into yellows and reds with the goal of making sure that we are identifying strategic opportunities and doing the right thing for the network. What we don't want to be in a position of is loading the truck the day of and realizing we're short. And maybe that wasn't the right person to short. Or panicking the week of and trying to essentially rob Peter to pay Paul on the fly without the appropriate data and prioritizing based on whatever we think whoever screams the loudest will say. What we need to do is get in a position where we're looking at it strategically and looking at it further in the future. Craft Portal allows us to do both. So as we look at this, you see a yellow error, and that's what we call a timing error. That means we've got the right product and in the right quantity, but we've got a timing issue. Let me give a good example of that. So let's say we're packaging on Thursday, and we got the order going out Tuesday. Now we've got three options. One is we can pull the production forward Monday, Tuesday to be ready for the order. The other option is we can push the order back to Thursday, Friday to meet the production. The final option, which is really the only option when it comes to reds, is we can leverage the rob Peter to pay Paul screen, as we call it. And that is a screen that sits behind the products. So it's a layer down from 10,000 foot to 5,000 foot because everything's drillable. And when we drill down on the wholesaler side, we're going to go into the same order screen that we looked at a minute ago. So going back over to the products and the rob Peter to pay Paul screen, this allows us to see all of our orders, and it allows us to prioritize who gets what. So in that yellow example, we could theoretically trim the orders down such that what we start the week with is enough to meet all the orders, right? So that we don't have to worry about that packaging on Thursday to meet what our commitments are this week. Now, the nice thing about this is it allows us to think strategically about those cuts. And a good example might be a wholesaler that's close that we ship maybe once or twice a week. We can probably take them down to 14, maybe even 10 days. Another wholesaler we see once a month is at 35, 40 days. Well, we don't want to cut that because we may run out of one SKU and we're not going to see them, and they may be out of stock for another 2 weeks before that order cycle comes up again, which again leads us back into that conversation around the inefficiencies of the supply chain. That's how they're created. Reds are simply that. We don't have enough product and there's not much we can do. Right, we can use the rob Peter to pay Paul screen to trim and give the appropriate product to the appropriate people, but we can also kick the order to the following week if we wanted to. But the great thing is, as we make all these changes, it's immediately kicking off notifications to your supplier so that they're informed about these changes and that they can plan accordingly. One of the biggest complaints we get from distributors is, what I ordered isn't what I got. Well, this allows us to be in constant communication as we make those adjustments. And quite frankly, sitting on top of the supply chain, we have visibility on where everybody stands, and we can make the best decisions for the overall network, not just for one distributor. Managing products with our distributor partners can be a challenge, but Craft Portal makes it easy and seamless. So from one screen, we can add products, remove products, turn products on, turn them off, change the pallet configurations, and this is all seamlessly pushed down to the distributor's ordering portal and that PO screen that we looked at earlier. So we have a seasonal, it's over, one click, done. So if we're managing that today with spreadsheets, we have to make sure that we're updating these spreadsheets. We may have to make sure that our distributors have the right version, and half the time they don't. And we have to update them with new products and explain what the products are. We don't have to do any of that now with Craft Portal. It's all here and it's all seamless. We actually go one step further too, and I mentioned it earlier, it's what we call brand rights. It allows us to specify what distributors or what state are allowed to buy what products, so that your distributor that's 3 states away isn't looking at that full book of products and just being confused about what to order. Or maybe you have different formats of packages for different states. This allows you to control who sees what. So again, what we're trying to do is make it seamless and easy for the distributors to order what they need to order. And again, going back to that PO screen. At the end of the day, it's about managing your network inventory and wholesaler DOI. And there's no better tool to do this than Craft Portal. This is why so many suppliers trust us every single day. Their distributor partners are also leveraging the Craft Portal every single day to place orders. And I think what you will find is if you have us run a coverage map for you while you're here at the conference, that 100% or nearly 100% of your wholesalers are already engaged and utilizing the Craft Portal every single week. So I alluded to it earlier in the presentation, but we can go one step further here. If you scan this QR code right from where you're sitting, or after the presentation, or even come by the VIP booth, while at the conference, we'll actually be able to run your out-of-stock report. So let me run you through this example out-of-stock report. This is a hypothetical brewery that does roughly 10,000 barrels. We can see, looking at this, that 23% is their out-of-stock rate. And as I compare that against their benchmark, that represents an opportunity to reduce the out-of-stock and capture over $500,000 in value. We can also show you what your overstock is at the wholesaler network. And in the case of this particular brewery, over 42% of the product sitting on the floor at their wholesalers is over 50 days of age. Now, if looking over to the right, you can also see we'll break it down by brand, we'll break it down by SKU, and we'll show your top offending wholesalers. So I think this is an amazing report that we can pull for you. And again, just scan the QR code like you would a menu at a restaurant, and we can pull up a form that'll allow us to pull this for you. Thank you. Looking forward to meeting everybody in person at the conference.